March 23, 1945. Reims, France. Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force. General Dwight D. Eisenhower sat behind his heavy mahogany desk inside what had once been a champagne warehouse, now converted into a command center. Outside, the steady tapping of spring rain against the windows filled the air. Inside, every wall was covered with maps. Red and blue lines traced Allied positions across Germany. Thick arrows pushed relentlessly toward Berlin. Dotted lines marked supply routes stretching all the way back to Normandy. Eisenhower was studying supply requisitions for the Rhine crossing operations, fuel allocations for the First Army, artillery ammunition for the Ninth Army, replacement troops for General Hodges' battered divisions. The paperwork of war was endless, unavoidable, and draining. The door opened. His chief of staff, General Walter Bedell Smith, stepped inside. Smith's expression was unreadable, but in his hand, he held a single sheet of paper, a prisoner of war status report, Third Army, dated March 23, 1945, 0600 hours. Without saying a word, Smith placed it on Eisenhower's desk. Eisenhower glanced down at it. His pen froze in mid-signature on a fuel requisition form. He blinked and read the number again. His face went blank. Not angry, not shocked, just empty. The kind of silence that comes when the mind temporarily stops because what it sees makes no sense. 50? Eisenhower said quietly. This says 50. Yes, sir. 50,000 prisoners in one night. 18 hours, to be precise. Eisenhower slowly looked up. Check this again. Already did, sir. Twice. 12 Corps reports 28,000. XX Corps reports 22,000. Total. 50,127 enemy prisoners of war captured between 1,800 hours on March 22nd and 1,200 hours on March 23rd. Eisenhower set his pen down carefully. He pulled over the intelligence summary from the 21st Army Group, Field Marshal Montgomery's command in the north, and scanned the numbers. 47,000 prisoners, 8 German divisions, 4 weeks of fighting, 47,000 total. Patton had just exceeded that in 18 hours, using 6 divisions. Bedell, Eisenhower said slowly, how many POW cages does Third Army currently have operational? 17, sir. As of this morning, they're requesting 12 more. Emergency priority. 12 more. Eisenhower repeated. Why? They've run out of barbed wire, sir. Eisenhower stared at him. Run out of barbed wire in one night? Apparently, sir, when you capture 50,000 prisoners, you require roughly 90 miles of barbed wire fencing to contain them in accordance with Geneva Convention standards. Third Army exhausted their entire theater allocation before dawn. That's impossible. Smith's expression didn't change. Apparently not, sir. Not when you're dealing with General Patton. Eisenhower stood and walked to the situation map. His finger traced the Third Army's positions around the Palatinate Pocket, the triangle of German-held territory between the Rhine, the Moselle, and the Siegfried Line. 2 weeks earlier, intelligence had estimated 14 German divisions trapped there, battered and undersupplied, but entrenched. SHAF planners had projected 2 weeks to clear the pocket through careful, methodical advances, coordinated artillery, and the gradual reduction of strong points. Patton had crushed it in 3 days. Get me Third Army headquarters on the line, Eisenhower said. But the prisoner count wasn't even the worst part. Patton hadn't asked permission for any of it. Before we go further into this story, if you're fascinated by the untold moments of World War II, the decisions, the personalities, and impossible achievements that shaped history, make sure you're subscribed to WW2 Elite. Hit the like button and drop a comment telling us which World War II commander you want us to cover next. We bring you the stories the history books gloss over. Now, let's return to March 1945, the moment Eisenhower realized his most aggressive general had just rewritten the rulebook on mobile warfare. March 23, 1945. 1,600 hours. The phone line from Supreme Headquarters in Reims to Third Army's forward headquarters in Oberstein, Germany, crackled with static. Eisenhower lifted the receiver. His voice was calm and controlled, the voice of a man who had learned never to sound surprised when dealing with George S. Patton. George, I'm looking at a report that says you captured 50,000 prisoners without requesting additional POW processing units and without coordinating with Army Group Logistics. Care to explain? There was a brief pause. Then Patton's voice came through, confident and unapologetic. Well, the Germans kept surrendering. I couldn't very well tell them to come back tomorrow, once the paperwork was sorted out. This isn't a joke, George. I wasn't joking, sir. 12 Corps broke through at Kaiserslautern. XX Corps hit them from the south. They collapsed faster than we expected. By midnight, entire regiments were surrendering without firing a shot. Some of them were marching themselves to the rear because we didn't have enough MPs to handle them. Eisenhower closed his eyes. He could picture it perfectly. Patton's armor punching through weak points. Infantry flooding in behind them. German units exhausted, cut off, surrounded, realizing there was no escape. The Third Army steamroller doing what it did best, moving so fast the enemy had no time to react. Montgomery spent a month preparing Operation Plunder, Eisenhower said. Massive artillery support. Airborne drops. 2 divisions. He's taking the Rhine crossing methodically by the book with every resource we can give him. And I crossed it last night, Patton interrupted. Didn't lose a man. You should have that report on your desk by morning. Silence. Absolute silence on the line. In Eisenhower's office, staff officers froze. Smith stopped mid-step. Every pair of eyes was fixed on the Supreme Commander, watching his face absorb what Patton had just said. You crossed the Rhine, Eisenhower said, his voice barely above a whisper. When were you planning to tell me? I'm telling you now, sir. 11th Armored Division. 2,230 hours last night. Assault boat south of Mainz. Barely any opposition. We're 6 miles deep already. Frankfurt is within reach. Eisenhower's hand tightened around the receiver. George, you're going to give me a heart attack. SHAF allocated resources for Montgomery's crossing. We planned it for weeks. Churchill is watching from an observation post. This was supposed to be the official Allied Rhine crossing, and you just decided to freelance. Ike, every hour we wait is an hour the Germans use to regroup. I had the bridgehead at Oppenheim. I had the boats. I had momentum. I took the shot. If I'd waited for authorization, they'd have reinforced the East Bank, and we would have lost men we didn't need to lose. There was logic in it, and Eisenhower knew it. Patton was reckless, yes. Insubordinate, absolutely. But he was also right more often than he was wrong. And when Patton was right, he was devastatingly effective. We'll discuss this when you get back to headquarters. Eisenhower finished. Until then, try not to capture the entire Wehrmacht without telling anyone. Understood, sir. The line went dead. Patton had hung up. Eisenhower slowly set the receiver back in its cradle and looked at Smith. Bedell, notify the Army Group commanders. Third Army has crossed the Rhine. Unauthorized. Successful. No casualties. Montgomery is going to love this. Smith almost smiled. Yes, sir. I'll draft the message very carefully. At Third Army headquarters in Oberstein, Patton placed the phone back on the hook and turned to his staff. His operations officer, his intelligence chief, and his logistics coordinator were all watching him, waiting for direction. Gentlemen, Patton said with a grin, the Supreme Commander would like us to slow down. Colonel Hal Maddox, his operations officer, raised an eyebrow. Are we slowing down, sir? Patton walked the map and tapped a point on the main river, nearly 30 miles beyond their current front line. Let's be across the Main by midnight. 4th Armored Division leads. I want Frankfurt by tomorrow afternoon. By March 24th, 3rd Army's prisoner intake had completely overwhelmed the European theater POW system. They were holding 63,000 prisoners in facilities designed for 15,000. Military police battalions worked around the clock building makeshift compounds using captured German materials. Barbed wire stripped from pillboxes, wooden posts taken from roadblocks, even sections of the Siegfried Line's dragon's teeth were torn out and repurposed as fence supports. 12 Corps sent an urgent report. German officers were organizing their own men because there weren't enough American guards. Prisoners were forming their own work details, cooking their own food from captured supplies, even posting their own sentries to prevent escapes. It was organized chaos, functional, but only barely. The International Red Cross sent a cable to SHEF. Geneva Convention regulations required adequate shelter, food, and medical care within 24 hours of capture. Current Third Army facilities exceeded capacity by 400%. Immediate action was required. At SHAF headquarters, General John C. Lee, the logistics commander responsible for supplying 9 Allied armies, arrived at Eisenhower's office with a stack of reports and an expression of barely controlled frustration. "Sir," Lee said, spreading charts across the desk, "Third Army has consumed 110% of its allocated fuel for March. They've exceeded their ammunition allotments by 40%. They're requisitioning rations from First Army depots without authorization. And according to this report, they've captured so many German vehicles that they're now using enemy trucks to transport their own supplies." Eisenhower studied the charts. Red ink was everywhere. Third Army was over budget on everything. "Is it working?" Eisenhower asked. Lee blinked. "Sir, is Patton's advance working? Are they achieving their objectives?" Lee hesitated. "They're advancing so fast our supply columns can't keep up. Patton is capturing German supply depots and using their fuel. He's literally running his army on enemy logistics. Yesterday, XX Corps captured a fuel dump near Darmstadt. Patton ordered it distributed to his tank battalions immediately. He didn't even report it through proper channels. But is it working?" Lee looked down at his charts, then back up. "Perfectly, sir, which is somehow worse." Eisenhower almost smiled. "Almost? How much fuel are we saving by Patton's initiative?" "Preliminary estimates suggest 2.1 million gallons over 2 weeks, sir, plus nearly 3 weeks of transportation capacity. He's essentially making the enemy supply his own defeat." "Then let him keep doing it," Eisenhower said. "But make sure someone is documenting everything. If we ever have to fight like this again, we need to know exactly how he's pulling it off." But Eisenhower's problems were only beginning, because on March 26, Patton stopped answering his phone. March 25, 1945. 21st Army Group headquarters near Venlo, Netherlands. Field Marshal Bernard Law Montgomery, commander of the British Second Army, the Canadian First Army, and the American Ninth Army temporarily under his control, sat in his caravan reading the morning intelligence summary. Operation Plunder was scheduled to begin that night. The official Allied crossing of the Rhine. 3 weeks of preparation. 80,000 troops. 3,500 artillery pieces. 2 airborne divisions ready to drop behind enemy lines. Churchill himself would be watching from an observation post on the West Bank. It would be methodical, by the book, overwhelming force applied systematically. The British way. Montgomery's intelligence officer handed him a report. Third Army Operational Summary, March 22nd to 24th. Montgomery read it. His expression didn't change, but those who knew him well could see the tension tightening around his eyes. Patton had crossed the Rhine the previous night using assault boats in darkness, with no preliminary bombardment, no massive artillery preparation, just boats and infantry, and he was already 6 miles deep. Montgomery set the report aside, picked up a message form, and wrote carefully, precisely, to Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, from 21st Army Group. Please confirm Third Army operations do not interfere with Operation Plunder timeline. Coordinated Allied advance essential for success. Recommend immediate clarification of command boundaries and operational objectives. His chief of staff read it and immediately understood the subtext. Translation: tell Patton to stop showing me up. The message was sent. At AEF, Smith read it aloud to Eisenhower. Eisenhower sighed. This was the part of Supreme Command no one talked about. Managing egos, balancing personalities, keeping brilliant but difficult men focused on the same objective instead of competing with each other. Draft a response. Eisenhower said, assure Montgomery that Operation Plunder remains the main effort. Third Army's crossing is a supporting operation. Emphasize coordination, even though Patton is already deeper into Germany than Plunder's objectives. Especially because of that, Monty needs to know his operation matters, and it does. We need crossings all along the Rhine, not just Patton's mad dash in the south. Smith nodded and began drafting. Eisenhower turned back to the map. Patton was approaching Frankfurt. Montgomery was preparing to cross. First Army was consolidating at Remagen. Ninth Army was supporting Montgomery. The Allied advance was working. It just wasn't working the way anyone had planned, which Eisenhower was learning was exactly what happened whenever George Patton was involved. And then Churchill got involved. March 26, 1945. Prime Minister Winston Churchill arrived at Montgomery's headquarters to personally observe Operation Plunder. He had brought photographers, war correspondents, and members of Parliament. This was meant to be the British Empire's triumphant crossing of the last Great Barrier on the road to Berlin, a historic moment meant to be remembered. Churchill was briefed on the operation, shown the maps, informed of the artillery plan, and the airborne drops. It was impressive, overwhelming, everything a perfectly staged set-piece operation was supposed to be. Then someone mentioned that the Third Army had crossed the Rhine 2 days earlier using assault boats. Churchill's expression became unreadable as he slowly turned to Montgomery. Is this true? Yes, Prime Minister. General Patton conducted an unauthorized crossing south of Mainz on the evening of March 22nd. It was not coordinated with Supreme Headquarters or with neighboring armies before the operation was executed. Churchill absorbed this information. Montgomery's intelligence officer pointed to the map. They have advanced 45 miles beyond the Rhine as of this morning, Prime Minister. They're approaching Frankfurt. Churchill stared at the map for a long moment. Then he did something no one expected. He smiled, a broad, genuine Winston Churchill smile. Gentlemen, he said, it appears the Americans have stolen a march on us. How very enterprising of General Patton. He turned to Montgomery. Bernard, I suggest we ensure that Operation Plunder is executed with such overwhelming success that no one remembers who crossed first. They may have crossed in boats. We shall cross with the full weight of the British Empire behind us. It was a diplomatic masterpiece. Churchill acknowledged Patton's achievement while reframing Plunder as a more significant and decisive operation. He understood what Eisenhower understood. This was not a competition. It was a war. And at that moment, the Allies were winning. That did not stop Montgomery from sending another message to ATF, requesting clarification on whether Third Army's advance might be moving too quickly for proper coordination with neighboring forces. Eisenhower read it and handed it to Smith. But Dell, what's the diplomatic way to say, let Patton run? Smith considered for a moment. I'll think of something, sir. What happened next would force Eisenhower to say words he never imagined he would ever say about George Patton. March 27, 1945. SHAF Operations Room. The situation map was updated every 6 hours with the latest unit positions. That morning, the staff officers responsible for updating Third Army's markers encountered a problem. Sir, a young lieutenant said to the duty officer, I can't confirm these positions. According to this report, the 4th Armored Division is at Frankfurt, but yesterday they were 30 miles west. That isn't possible in 24 hours with enemy opposition. The duty officer checked the radio logs, reviewed the position reports, and compared them to yesterday's map. The lieutenant was right. 4th Armored Division had moved 30 miles overnight. 12 Corps was at Wiesbaden. XX Corps had taken Darmstadt. Third Army was advancing faster than the maps could track. Update the markers, the duty officer said, and note that these are estimated positions, not fully confirmed. We'll clarify when the next report comes in. By the time the next report arrived, the positions had changed again. SHAF operations staff began updating Third Army's locations every 4 hours instead of every 6, then every 2 hours. They still could not keep up. By the time the pins were placed on the map, Patton's units had already moved beyond them. It was unprecedented. German resistance was collapsing. Entire regiments were surrendering, not because they were being decisively defeated in battle, but because by the time they received orders to establish a defensive line, American tanks were already behind them. At 21st Army Group headquarters, Montgomery's British liaison officer to 3rd Army sent a report. Today is March 28th. They are 13 days ahead of schedule. Montgomery read it without comment and returned to planning the follow-up phases of Operation Plunder. If Patton was going to ignore the schedule, Montgomery would ensure British forces executed their own operations flawlessly. At 3rd Army headquarters, Patton was studying maps when his intelligence officer, Colonel Oscar Koch, entered with the latest prisoner figures. Sir, as of 1,200 hours today, total prisoners captured since March 22nd, 91,000. 91,000? Patton repeated. Yes, sir. 12 Corps, 41,000. XX Corps, 33,000. 8 Corps, 17,000. We've captured more prisoners in 6 days and, well, sir, than anyone. Patton grinned. Oscar, send a message to General Bradley. Tell him if he can give me enough gasoline, I'll have 3rd Army in Berlin in 48 hours. Koch hesitated. Sir, should we clear that with India first? Send the message, Oscar. The message went to 12th Army Group headquarters to General Omar Bradley, Patton's immediate superior and longtime friend. Bradley shook his head, picked up the phone and called Eisenhower. Ike, I've given up trying to control George. I just call him every morning to find out where he is. Yesterday, he was supposed to be securing bridgeheads. Today, he's about to cut off Army Group B's entire retreat route. Tomorrow, he'll probably be in Bavaria. Eisenhower was silent for a moment. Brad, is he achieving objectives? He's achieving objectives that won't even be assigned for another 2 weeks. Then let him run. But make sure someone is keeping track of everything he's doing. If this works, we're going to have to study it. And if it doesn't work. Bradley hung up, looked at his chief of staff, and said, make sure 3rd Army has priority on fuel shipments and start drafting after-action reports, detailed ones, because nobody's going to believe this when the war is over. Meanwhile, on the German side, the situation looked very different and very frightening. General Hermann Bulk commanded Army Group G, the German forces facing Patton in southern Germany. He was a veteran of the Eastern Front. He had fought the Soviets and understood fast, aggressive armored warfare. But what he was seeing now was something else entirely. On March 28th, Bulk attempted to establish a defensive line along the main river. He issued orders to 3 divisions. Hold the river crossings, deny the Americans bridgeheads, buy time for Army Group B to withdraw from the Ruhr. By the time those orders reached his forward units, American tanks were already across the Main. The defensive line Bulk tried to create never truly existed. After the war, during Allied interrogation, Bulk would say, we can now understand Patton's speed. Our doctrine called for consolidation after river crossings. Rest, resupply, bring up artillery, prepare for the next phase. Patton simply never stopped. By the time we received orders to establish a defensive line, his tanks were already behind it. It was like fighting a forest fire. Everywhere we tried to contain it, it had already spread beyond our positions. Another German officer later put more simply, Patton did not fight us. He overran us. There is a difference. Even the Soviet liaison officer at SHAF took notice. On March 28th, he sent a report to Moscow. American General Patton is advancing at rates comparable to the Soviet operations of 1944 during the Bagration Offensive, capturing German forces before they are able to establish defensive positions. Recommends close study of American mobile warfare techniques for future operations. The Red Army, which had pioneered deep battle doctrine and perfected operational maneuver, was impressed by Patton's speed. That was how fast Third Army was moving. By March 28th, Third Army had advanced nearly 87 miles beyond the Rhine in just 5 days. They had captured 93,000 prisoners. They had destroyed or captured 1,400 German vehicles, and they were now threatening to encircle the entire German Army Group B in the Ruhr, an operation SADF planners had estimated would take 6 weeks. Patton had done the preliminary work in less than one. At his forward headquarters, Patton stood over a map, tracing routes toward Berlin, toward Prague, toward Munich. He turned to his staff. "Gentlemen, we have the Germans on the run. Every hour we maintain momentum is an hour they cannot regroup. I don't care if we're ahead of schedule. I don't care if logistics is screaming. We keep moving until they tell us to stop, and maybe not even then." Someone asked about casualties. Patton answered immediately. "We're taking fewer casualties moving fast than we ever would moving slow. Speed is armor. Speed is firepower. Speed wins wars." And he was right. Third Army's casualties during the March offensive were remarkably low, less than half of what SHAF had projected for operations of this scale. Because they were moving so fast, German forces never had time to organize effective resistance. Units surrendered rather than fight. Strong points were bypassed instead of being reduced. Patton had discovered that in mobile warfare, speed itself was a weapon. But back at SHAF, the question everyone was asking was simple. How much longer could he keep this up? March 29, 1945. General Dwight D. Eisenhower decided he needed to see it with his own eyes. He boarded his personal C-47 transport and flew to Frankfurt, which Patton had captured that very morning. The airfield was still being cleared of destroyed German aircraft when Eisenhower's plane touched down. Patton was waiting on the runway, uniform immaculate, boots polished, the trademark ivory-handled revolver on his hip. He was grinning. Eisenhower stepped off the aircraft and looked around at the captured airfield, at the city of Frankfurt in the distance, smoke from recent fighting still hanging on the horizon. "George," Eisenhower said, "do you have any idea how many regulations you violated in the past week?" Patton snapped to attention and saluted. "No, sir. I've been too busy winning the war." They walked to Patton's command vehicle, a captured German staff car that Third Army had appropriated somewhere along the advance. Inside, maps covered every surface. Situation reports, intelligence summaries, logistics updates. The organized chaos of a headquarters that was moving too fast to ever truly settle. "You exceeded your fuel allocations," Eisenhower said, studying the maps. "You captured more prisoners than our system can process. You crossed the Rhine without authorization. You've advanced so far ahead of First Army that you've exposed your flanks for 60 miles. Patton pulled out a larger map and spread it across the hood of the car. "Ike, look at this. We've cut off the German 7th Army's retreat right here. 12 Corps and XX Corps are closing the gap in 2 days, maybe less. We'll close the Ruhr pocket. That's 300,000 German soldiers out of the war. Maybe more. They can't retreat. They can't resupply. They're finished." Eisenhower studied the map. Patton was right. Third Army's advance had created an opportunity SHAF planners hadn't anticipated for another month. The Ruhr encirclement, the largest industrial region in Germany, defended by some of the Wehrmacht's best remaining units, was about to be sealed off, not through careful, methodical planning, but through sheer speed. "And Montgomery?" Eisenhower asked. Patton didn't hesitate. "Monty's doing fine. He's got the North. I've got the center. Between us, we're ending this war. His way works. My way works." They're different, but they both work. It was the most diplomatic thing Patton could have said, and it was true. Montgomery's methodical, overwhelming approach and Patton's fast, aggressive approach were both succeeding. The Germans could not defend against both at the same time. Eisenhower looked at the map. 93,000 prisoners, the Rhine bridgehead, the thrust toward the Ruhr, the captured cities, the shattered German divisions. Then he looked at Patton, exhausted, energized, already planning the next phase. "George," Eisenhower said quietly, "you're either going to win this war 6 months early or get us all court-martialed." Patton grinned. "I'll take those odds, sir." Eisenhower almost smiled. Almost. 50,000 prisoners in one night, Eisenhower said. More than an entire army group captured in a month. You know what this means. Patton's grin widened. "It means Third Army gets first pick of the German beer stocks when we reach Bavaria." Eisenhower shook his head. He was frustrated. He was impressed. He was exasperated. He was watching a man who operated by rules that didn't exist in any doctrine, who achieved results that shouldn't have been possible, who made the impossible look routine. And that was when Eisenhower said it. The words that would define Patton. The words that acknowledged what everyone already knew, but had never quite spoken aloud. Eisenhower looked at George Patton, at the map showing impossible achievements, at the general who kept breaking every rule and succeeding anyway, and said, "It means, George, that you're the only man I know who can make the impossible routine." Silence followed. Patton stopped grinning for just a moment. He was serious now, because he understood exactly what Eisenhower meant. This wasn't a compliment. It wasn't a reprimand. It was recognition. An acknowledgement of a fundamental truth everyone had seen, but no one had yet put into words. Other commanders planned for what was possible. They calculated logistics, assessed enemy strength, estimated timelines, prepared contingencies. They operated within the boundaries of the achievable. Patton operated in a different realm entirely. He didn't break rules out of recklessness. He transcended them because his operational tempo existed on another plane. He understood something about modern warfare that doctrine had not yet caught up with. Momentum was its own force multiplier. When you moved faster than the enemy could react, when you never gave them time to consolidate, when you turned their own expectations against them, the impossible became inevitable. The 50,000 prisoners were not an anomaly. They were proof that Patton had learned how to weaponize speed. German units didn't surrender because they had been defeated in battle. They surrendered because by the time they received orders to defend a position, American tanks were already behind them. They surrendered because resistance became meaningless when the enemy seemed to be everywhere at once. Eisenhower understood this now. What looked like Patton's chaos was not chaos at all. It was an extraordinarily sophisticated form of warfare that violated every principle of slow, methodical advance, yet achieved in days what orthodox tactics would have taken weeks to accomplish. "Thank you, sir," Patton said quietly. Then the grin returned. "Now, about that gasoline allocation." Eisenhower laughed. "Get back to work, George, and try to leave some Germans for the rest of us to capture." The Palatinate Rhine campaign from March 13 to March 28, 1945, resulted in Third Army capturing a total of 113,000 German prisoners, more than the entire British 21st Army Group, which captured 87,000 during the same period, despite having more divisions. By April 1st, Third Army had advanced 120 miles beyond the Rhine. The Ruhr pocket was closed on April 4th, trapping 317,000 German soldiers, the largest encirclement of German forces in a Western theater. Third Army did the preliminary work in less than a week. The statistics were staggering when laid out clearly. Patton's Rhine crossing at Oppenheim, 16 assault boats executed at night, 0 casualties, no preliminary bombardment. Montgomery's Rhine crossing at Wesel, Operation Plunder, 80,000 troops, 3,500 artillery pieces, 2 airborne divisions launched, 3,968 casualties. Both crossings succeeded. Both were necessary. But the contrast between them was striking. SHAF Logistics later calculated that Patton's use of captured German supplies, fuel depots, ammunition stockpiles, and vehicle parks saved the Allied supply chain approximately 2.1 million gallons of fuel and nearly 3 weeks of transportation capacity. He had quite literally forced the enemy to supply his own defeat. But the numbers only told part of the story. The real story was what Patton understood, the thing that made staff officers nervous and enemies terrified. In warfare, speed was not just a tactical advantage. Every hour that Third Army kept moving was an hour the German command could not reorganize, could not establish defensive lines, could not execute an orderly retreat, could not bring up reserves, and could not coordinate with neighboring units. The 50,000 prisoners captured in one night were not taken because Third Army was stronger. They were taken because Third Army was faster. Speed created a cascading effect. German units lost contact with higher headquarters. Orders became outdated before they could be executed. Defensive plans collapsed because by the time positions were prepared, the enemy was already past them. Patton had weaponized momentum, and once he had it, he never let it go. Eisenhower's genius, and it truly was genius, was recognizing that Patton's apparent disorder was actually a highly refined form of warfare that doctrine had not yet caught up to. While it violated every principle of methodical advance, it achieved results that conventional operations simply could not match. In his memoir Crusade in Europe, published in 1948, Eisenhower wrote that Patton's operations during the Rhine crossing period demonstrated that calculated audacity, when backed by competent staff work and aggressive leadership, could compress timelines that conventional planning declared impossible. He added, "I spent half my time reining him in and the other half wondering why I bothered." That sentence captured the essential truth of the Eisenhower-Patton relationship. Eisenhower knew Patton was difficult. He knew he was insubordinate. He knew he created logistical nightmares and diplomatic headaches. But he also knew that when you pointed Patton at the enemy and told him to attack, impossible things happened. When General George C. Marshall, Army Chief of Staff and the architect of the American war machine, reviewed the European campaign statistics in June 1945, he noted something extraordinary. Third Army's prisoner capture rate in March 1945 exceeded the entire United States Army's capture rate during the final German offensive in World War I. One army, 1 month, 113,000 prisoners. Marshall's handwritten note on the report, now preserved in the National Archives, read, "Recommend study of Third Army operations as basis for future mobile warfare doctrine. Also recommend keeping Patton away from supply officers." Even Marshall, serious, methodical, and relentlessly by the book, recognized that Patton had discovered something worth studying, something that transcended conventional military wisdom. The man who captured 50,000 Germans in a single night ended World War II, having taken a total of 956,000 prisoners, more than any other Allied army. American, British, Canadian, French, none matched Patton's total. And he did it while perpetually running out of fuel, perpetually exceeding his logistical allocations, and perpetually operating ahead of schedule. Third Army's final statistics were extraordinary. 531 days of combat operations, 1.3 million miles traveled, 12,000 cities and towns liberated or captured, 956,000 prisoners taken, and approximately 400,000 enemy casualties inflicted. Third Army's own casualties totaled about 137,000, of which 21,000 were killed in action. For context, that represented a prisoner capture ratio of roughly 7-to-1. For every American casualty, Third Army captured 7 German soldiers and removed them from the war. That ratio was almost unheard of in military history. After the war, military historians studied Third Army operations in an attempt to understand how Patton had achieved what he achieved. The U.S. Army Command and General Staff College devoted an entire course to analyzing the March 1945 offensive. The conclusion was both simple and profound. Patton understood that in mobile warfare, the enemy's decision-making cycle itself was a vulnerability. If you could move faster than the enemy could observe, orient, decide, and act, if you could complete multiple operations before the enemy finished reacting to the first one, then you created paralysis. They were defeated through disorientation. General Hermann Bulk later told American military historians in extensive post-war interviews, Patton's operations were not simply fast. They were incomprehensible. We could not predict where he would strike next because he did not follow predictable patterns. He attacked where we were weak, bypassed where we were strong, and never paused long enough for us to reorganize. It was like fighting smoke everywhere and nowhere at the same time. That might be the best description of Patton's operational method ever recorded. Fighting smoke everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. The Soviet Union studied Patton's operations closely. Soviet deep battle doctrine, developed in the 1930s and perfected during the Great Patriotic War, emphasized similar principles of speed, momentum, and operational depth. Soviet military theorists recognized in Patton a kindred spirit, someone who understood operational art at the highest level. In Soviet military academies after the war, Patton's March 1945 offensive was taught alongside Soviet operations as a model of how to conduct deep penetration warfare in the enemy's rear. The irony was that Patton had never studied Soviet doctrine. He didn't need to. He had grasped intuitively what Soviet theorists had developed through years of systematic analysis. Great military minds, it seemed, arrived at the same truths regardless of nationality or formal doctrine. But perhaps the most fitting tribute to Patton's impact came from an unexpected source. In 1947, during the Nuremberg trials, German Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, chief of the Wehrmacht High Command, was asked which Allied general the Germans had feared most. His answer was immediate: Patton. We always knew where Montgomery was going. We could usually predict Eisenhower's decisions. Bradley was methodical, but Patton, we never knew where he would strike next. And once he started moving, we couldn't stop him. The man the Germans feared most. The general who captured 50,000 prisoners in one night. The commander who made the impossible routine. George S. Patton died in December 1945, killed in a car accident in Germany. He never returned home to the hero's welcome he deserved. He never saw his grandchildren. But his legacy lived on in doctrine, in military theory, and in the understanding that speed, momentum, and audacity can achieve what firepower and numbers alone cannot. In private letters written after Patton's death, Eisenhower said, "George was the most brilliant combat commander I ever knew, also the most difficult. I would not have won the war without him. I probably could not have survived peacetime with him. He was a warrior in the truest sense. Uncomfortable in any world but war, transcendent in combat. That may be the truest epitaph Patton could ever have had. A warrior in the truest sense, transcendent in combat. The Third Army Patton built, the techniques he pioneered, the operational tempo he established, all became foundational to American armored doctrine. The 1949 Field Manual on Armored Operations included sections drawn directly from Third Army's 1945 campaigns. The U.S. Army's airland battle doctrine of the 1980s echoed Patton's emphasis on speed, initiative, and deep penetration. Even modern maneuver warfare theory owes a debt to what Patton proved was possible in 1945. He captured 50,000 Germans overnight, not through superior firepower, not through overwhelming numbers, but through speed, through momentum, through an understanding that in warfare, the enemy's mind is the ultimate battlefield. Confuse it, disorient it, move faster than it can think, and the enemy will defeat itself. That was Patton's genius. And that is why Eisenhower said what he said on March 29, 1945, standing in a captured German city, looking at maps that showed impossible achievements. "You're the only man I know who can make the impossible routine." It wasn't a compliment. It wasn't an insult. It was simply the truth. And if you made it this far in this story, I want to thank you for watching WW2 Elite. This is a kind of deep dive into history we do here. Not just the famous battles, but the personalities, the decisions, and the moments that changed everything. If you want more stories like this, make sure you're subscribed, hit that notification bell, leave a comment telling me which World War II story you want to hear next, and share this video with anyone who loves military history. These stories deserve to be remembered. These men deserve to be honored. And the lessons they taught us deserve to be learned. Thank you for watching. And remember, history isn't just about what happened.